Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 393, D.B. Cooper. Who was he? Did he survive his jump? We'll explain in brief. Why would this be, by the way, under the Occult playlist? Well, it involves some claims of the paranormal, that comes from the fringes of the internet mainly, or claims of conspiracy of one sort or another, D.B. Cooper the CIA agent, D.B. Cooper the Russian agent, things along those lines, most of which have been pretty much discounted, by the way. But it also involves an element of simply the unknown, that which is hidden, veiled, secret, so to speak. They probably already know who D.B. Cooper was, and his fate, but maybe they didn't tell the public for maybe a good reason. D.B. Cooper is actually Dan Cooper. D.B. Cooper was a confusion by one of the broadcasts reporting the skyjacking story. This is back in the mid-70s. Man gets onto an aircraft, discloses to one of the attendants, "Hey, look, I got an explosive." We're not sure whether it was real or not, but it looked real enough. And then hijacks the aircraft and wants to make it down to Mexico, actually. But the craft wasn't capable of making it all the way down there. And I don't think that that was the point from the get-go. D.B. Cooper seems to have had things logistically pretty well sorted out. Again, he knew that the weather in the area was inclement, so when we say, well, he was poorly dressed for the occasion and maybe he didn't have any parachuting experience at all, they had to get 4 shoots for him. The idea was he wanted 2 sets so that they would think that he was taking a hostage. That was probably the actual goal. That way nobody would down the aircraft or anything like that. And then he jumps. And he jumps somewhere over the very rural, vast wilderness north of Portland, actually. Portland, Oregon, somewhere in that particular area. There's a place called Tina Bar, by the way, where some of the D.B. Cooper notes years later were found buried in the soil. Well, sand, really. And they thought it might be on purpose that they were buried there. They had a few bundles of bills. The family, I think, that found it, I think they sold it for tens of thousands of dollars, which back then was actually a lot of money. It may not sound like a lot now. You're like, well, I can buy my groceries for a week. Well, you know, several tens of thousands of dollars back in the 1980s was pretty valuable. It's probably equivalent to about 100 grand today. They made out pretty well for finding those bills. I have my own theory. I think that D.B. Cooper planned the entire thing out knowing what would happen in advance. He obviously knew that that kind of aircraft that he was at least rudimentarily familiar with could not make it, and he probably was a paratrooper, by the way, before. I agree with that part of the theory. Couldn't make it all the way without refueling. And so he didn't really care. He was just trying to set up a flight trajectory to go over the area in which he jumped anyway. If he did intend to refuel and make it all the way to Mexico, doesn't make sense that he jumped at all now, does it? There would be no reason to. But he did. He became frustrated with the timeline, perhaps would be the other explanation. I think that he was indeed, prior, a paratrooper and had aviation experience of one sort or another. I think that's pretty much agreed upon by most people that analyze the case. I think that the Canadian Dan Cooper comic thing may just be a coincidence, although, I mean, there's no proof of who he was, so we may never know. And several of the suspects that have been named, I can't remember their exact names, my apologies, I don't have the wiki page open or something like that right now, did look an awful lot like the sketches of this individual. That rather narrows things down. If you've got somebody who works in aviation and looks pretty much like a dead ringer for Cooper, or an individual who looks almost exactly like him and then proceeds to get caught skyjacking, I believe, the next year, those would probably be your top suspects. I have a feeling that he survived the jump. Originally, years ago, when I weighed in on it, I didn't make a specific video on the topic, but I mentioned it in passing. I suspected that D.B. Cooper did not survive. But then I looked at all of the available evidence, including the money that was buried, the lack of any sort of debris left behind in or around the drop zone. Like, they never found a parachute. They never found a cadaver or anything like that. You would think that they probably would have been able to find it. Yes, it is a remote area, but it's actually not that terribly large of an area. And when they shifted the search zone because they recalculated where he probably landed, again, they found nothing at all. The only remnant you find are these bills. It is possible that they got washed down on their own and then covered up when work was being done on that particular riverside. That is entirely possible. I would think it would have been buried deeper if that were the case, though. So at some point afterwards, probably after that work was conducted, it appears that this money was left there. It probably was a considerable number of years afterwards. It would have been after that river work had been done. Again, natural depositing theory aside, it doesn't sound as plausible as, hey, someone buried it here. Now, there's another possibility. Somebody found Dan Cooper's money, and they buried it. So Dan Cooper did die. Maybe they found the body, maybe they didn't. Maybe the body was recovered, maybe it wasn't. Maybe the body's laying, under a bunch of debris in that area. Of course, that's entirely possible. And then subsequently, the money was checked out by this individual, and they realized what they had, and they got scared, and they decided to bury it because they're like, oh shit, I don't think I'm supposed to have this. Or maybe they were a criminal. Somebody with a criminal history finds D.B. Cooper's stash of money. They realize that it's D.B. Cooper's cash because, I don't know, maybe they were interested in the case or something. They checked the notes and they said, oh shit, yeah, well, I can't turn it into the police because, I'm on the run, I'm a fugitive. Or I've got a lengthy rap sheet. They'll think, I don't know, maybe I killed D.B. Cooper. Maybe they'll think I am D.B. Cooper. Oh shit, they look in the mirror and they see they look a little bit similar or something like that, and they freak out and they decide to just bury the money. All of these are entirely possible. What I think is that somebody with aviation experience, likely military experience as well, so they would have survival skills. That'd be probably the only way they could have gotten through the maelstrom in such a remote area. Jumped. I think they knew that there would be multiple possible flight trajectories, and they did not care. They knew the general area they'd be landing in. They may or may not have been dressed appropriately for the occasion. They could have had an accomplice, but I think that the jump was successfully made. I don't think somebody would act with such a cool head and in such a way as Cooper allegedly did by all witnesses that were there if he weren't pretty damn confident he could get away with it. Now, other than the money that was buried, none of the rest was ever recovered. It could be that Dan Cooper simply wanted to become a legend of sorts, and that the taking of the money was coincidental to wanting to do this. It doesn't say, it's not as good a story if you know you can make the jump, and you've got everything planned out. If you demand the ransom beforehand, it becomes a much more interesting story. One that you know that nobody's ever going to solve because you're never going to spend the money anyway. He probably buried the packet and then burned the rest in a bonfire. Maybe he was already wealthy or something like that. Maybe he just genuinely disliked the air group or something like that. He allegedly, and again, with witness testimony, we have to be careful because changing a couple of words in the sentence could have an entirely different meaning. So he said something to the effect of, I don't have a grudge against your airline, ma'am. I just have a grudge. Assuming that that quote is accurate, it could point to a grudge against the government. He's like, well, the government screwed me over. I didn't get my pension or something. They dishonorably discharged me. So I'm going to do skyjacking. I'm going to show that I am actually a qualified aviationist and that they were wrong to fire me. Maybe there was some complaint against someone in the Air Force or whatever, or some pilot. And then they say, well, I'm going to show them. I'm going to show how good with aircraft I am, and with survival skills and everything else. And they're going to be freaking out because I've got all of this money, and they're going to be searching the whole country, and everyone's going to be talking about me for years and years to come, and they're never going to find me. By now, by the way, this individual is almost certainly dead. If not, they're probably 100 goddamn years old, based on the sketches and the estimates of people. It would put him in his late 30s through mid-40s or thereabouts. So this was a middle-aged individual. It's been a long time, since the 1970s. Most people that were in their 40s at that point have passed away. I think Cooper survived the jump, but I don't think that Cooper survives today, and I don't think that they're ever going to find any further evidence. Apparently there were a bunch of cigarette butts left behind that they could test forensically with new technology against some of the suspects in the case, but they lost them. Again, how very convenient. That's about all. Peace out.